5 major championships, 4 years on LIV, one decision that cost him tens of millions of dollars in forfeited equity just to get his card back. The golf world has watched Brooks Koepka cross the floor, pay the penalty, and start over at a ranking outside the top 250. Now the players are talking, and what they are saying is more complicated than the simple comeback story the headlines have been selling. Here's the full story. The Koepka who came back to the PGA Tour in January of 2026 is not the Koepka who left. That statement sounds obvious, but the specifics of what has changed matter enormously for how you interpret everything that has happened since. The player who joined LIV, was ranked inside the top 10 in the world, was a 5-time major champion, and carried genuine psychological dominance on the biggest stages. He famously said that majors were the easiest tournaments to win because so many players eliminated themselves through nerves before he even needed to apply pressure. That kind of confidence, whether you found it arrogant or admirable, is a genuine competitive weapon. It creates hesitation in opponents. It builds mental architecture that surviving pressure tests requires. The player who came back is ranked outside the top 200. He spent 4 years in LIV fields that, whatever their individual talent level, did not replicate the weekly grind of PGA Tour competition. He was not regularly testing himself against 150 world-class professionals across 72 holes, with a cut looming. The competitive sharpness that weekly tour golf hones over a full season, the ability to fight from behind on Sunday or close out a lead under real pressure from a deep field, dulls without the repetition. Nobody is saying Koepka forgot how to hit a golf ball. But the specific conditioning of major championship form requires maintenance, and 4 years on LIV was not that maintenance. The players who have spoken about his return fall into 2 very distinct camps, and the division is more honest than the public statements tend to suggest. In the first camp, respect for the decision. The ones who stayed on the PGA Tour, who watched the tour fight for its survival, and held their ground, largely acknowledge that Koepka's decision to come back, particularly given the financial cost, represents a genuine commitment rather than a quiet retreat. He did not have to pay what he paid. He could have stayed on LIV, collected his salary, and let the situation resolve itself over time. Instead, he paid a reported $5 million charitable donation as a penalty, forfeited his equity stake in his team, and gave up FedEx Cup eligibility. That is not a man sneaking back through a side door. Quick pause. If you think Koepka deserves full credit for the price he paid to come back, type "earned it" in the comments. If you think he only came back because he saw LIV collapsing and got out ahead of it, type "smart exit." I read every single one. In the second camp, pointed skepticism, most of it directed at the timing rather than the man. Wyndham Clark, in one of the more noteworthy reactions to the return, weighed in on Koepka's decision with observable caution. The subtext in Clark's response was clear. Koepka left when the money was overwhelming. He came back when the money was uncertain. Whether that represents principled evolution or calculated pragmatism depends entirely on how generously you read the situation. Other players, speaking more anonymously, have questioned whether the returning member program should have been available at all. The argument runs roughly like this. Players who stayed on the PGA Tour during the LIV war, who gave up the guaranteed money and the Saudi contracts and the appearance fees, did so at real financial cost to themselves. They believed in the tour and its future at a moment when that belief required sacrifice. Koepka left, he took the money, and then, when the money looked less secure, a door appeared and he walked back through it. The players who never left are not all inclined to pretend that the timeline does not exist. Where Koepka himself has been most revealing is in his public confidence. Before the U.S. Open at Shinnecock Hills, the course where he had won his second consecutive title in 2018, he spoke about his ball striking being as good as it had ever been, about feeling exactly as he felt in his major winning prime. That confidence is quintessentially Koepka. He does not hedge. He does not manage expectations. He states his belief in himself and dares the evidence to contradict him. On this occasion, the evidence unfortunately had its say before he could make his case. A nerve injury in his hand, which had already forced him from the RBC Canadian Open when he could barely grip the club, left him compromised heading into the most meaningful week of his comeback. He played Shinnecock. He did not threaten. The return that was supposed to announce itself loudly arrived with a whimper. What the players notice most about Koepka now, versus what they remember from his peak, is the absence of the aura. At his best, Koepka's name on a Sunday leaderboard changed how other players approached their own rounds. They knew he would not flinch. They knew the back nine of a major would produce his best, rather than his worst. That certainty about what he would do under pressure was itself a form of pressure, and it was a weapon he carried for years. Nobody is quite sure whether that aura will rebuild itself. Auras are earned through results, and the results so far have not produced the evidence. The truth about Brooks Koepka after his LIV return is that the story is genuinely unresolved, the talent is real, the decision to come back was costly and therefore meaningful. The price he paid is not the behavior of someone who does not care where he plays. But the body is compromised, the ranking is a fraction of what it was, and the competitive environment he stepped back into is not waiting for him to find his feet. The PGA Tour does not do sentiment, it does performance. And performance is the one thing Koepka cannot yet point to as proof that the return is working. Scheffler's specific comments about Koepka after the Travelers Championship playoff on Monday morning are worth examining closely because they arrived unprompted and carry the weight of someone who genuinely means what he says, rather than someone filling press conference space. Scheffler talked about watching Koepka warming up on the range, about how solidly he has always struck the ball, about seeing in him a player who is never going to be underperforming because he is not putting in the work. That last point matters. Koepka's comeback critics can question his motives and his timing. They cannot question his preparation. The man who won back-to-back US Opens did not do that by accident, and he is not grinding through a return on fumes. The engine is still running. The question is only whether the results that validate it will arrive before the conversation moves on. His path back through the rankings also illustrates just how steep the climb is for any player who leaves the PGA Tour ecosystem for an extended period. The ranking points required to re-establish genuine elite status accumulate slowly and fall quickly. A player outside the top 250 is not in the same queue as a player outside the top 30. He needs consistent performances over many months just to enter fields where the best players are competing every week. And until he is in those fields regularly, the competitive sharpening that his game needs is unavailable to him. It is a cycle that punishes the return regardless of how talented the player attempting it happens to be. The players who stayed on the PGA Tour during the LIV war are watching this unfold, with a mix of emotions that none of them are particularly keen to discuss publicly. Sympathy is there, for some. Satisfaction is there, for others. The more measured voices simply observe that professional golf is merciless toward absence, and that Koepka's situation is the clearest possible illustration of why. Whatever the financial rewards of the LIV years, they came at a competitive cost that is now being paid in very specific, very visible ways. Scheffler said it cleanly after the Travelers Championship on Monday. He talked about watching Koepka on the range and elsewhere, the work rate, the commitment, the evidence of a player who is still putting in the hours. That kind of acknowledgement from the world number one means something. But Scheffler also wins. Koepka at the moment is not winning. Until he is, the truth about his return will remain a question rather than an answer. The one thing nobody disputes, across both camps, is that the next 12 months will settle the argument more definitively than any amount of analysis. Koepka either produces results that belong in his own history, or the consensus hardens around the idea that the LIV years cost him the window in which he could still win at the highest level. He has always bet on himself. That has always been his defining characteristic. The bet is on again, and this time the stakes are his legacy, rather than a paycheck. Whether the answer arrives before his window closes is the only thing the golf world now wants to know. If this laid out the real picture of where Koepka stands, drop a like before you scroll away. It pushes this toward other golf fans who want analysis rather than just headlines. And subscribe, because this story is still being written, and there is more coming every week.